This off and tell you a little bit about what we're doing. My name is Kevin Mickey. I am the current chair of ERISA's Community Resilience Committee within its larger work group, or work group within its larger committee. It feels like Monday. And a former ERISA president. Honored to be part of this webinar today, along with my colleagues Tari and Emma from NAPSG, who will introduce themselves. We're going to tag team throughout this event and share some interesting information with you. I think you're going to find this as interesting as we did when we were actually attending the event. This is related to a recent summit that we all had the opportunity to attend. And we're actually not here to promote the summit. We're here to tell you about all the interesting things that were discussed by members of the public safety GIS profession and the takeaways that we heard from that I think can inform all of the work that we do as professionals in the GIS community. So if you have not heard, ERISA has evolved recently to continue its 60-year plus history of meeting the needs of the geospatial profession. And its new form is called the Geospatial Professional Network. As this slide implies, we're evolving to become this. It's driven by a commitment to innovation and leadership in the geospatial field. This is the result of many, many hours of concentrated engagement with our community, with our members, with peers in the profession, to understand what current GIS professionals and those that are coming to us in the future are interested in and how they want to be served as members of a professional organization. Those of us that have held leadership positions and continue to do so in the organization are really excited about this, and we hope that your sense of interest and excitement of this is equal to ours. Tari, next slide, please. So within this organization, we have a number of committees. We have professional staff, who is absolutely wonderful. Couldn't do it without them. A board of directors who provides I think, outstanding leadership to help guide the organization's path forward. We have a number of different committees. Our chapters are absolutely invaluable, representing local interest as part of a national structure and international structure. And then, of course, we have lots of committees that are made up by individuals exactly like yourselves who make all of this possible. If you're interested in becoming part of this family, becoming part of really making a difference in the geospatial profession, I hope you find a home here in this organization if you've not already become part of it. I think it's the best thing that I ever did when I became a geospatial professional, and I've never looked back with any regrets, only to the future. Next slide, please. So I am, again, involved with the Geospatial, or the Community Resilience Committee. We have a really exciting group of people, very passionate about the topic of community resilience. We have multiple working groups that are working on things related to climate change, community resilience, not just hazards, but all aspects of resilience. We're creating products, including one that you're going to hear a little bit about today, that not only help members of the GPN, but also the broader geospatial community. So we have a lot to share with you that's based on the work of this organization. We do also have one of the things on our website that you may find interesting is a call to action that our board of directors approved in October of 2023. I encourage you to take a look at that. It represents ERISA's commitment to contributing to and advancing goals that were set out by the United Nations in its Sustainability Development Goals structure. Next slide, please. So now we get ready for today's webinar. Again, today we're going to have three presenters. Myself, I'm with the Polis Center, which is in the Luddy School of Informatics, Computing, and Engineering at Indiana University, Indianapolis. I've been with the organization for 35 years in various roles and currently do a lot of work working with communities all over the country and supporting community resilience analysis activities, mitigation planning, education, and many other things. I'm going to ask my two colleagues, Tari and Emma, to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Kevin. Tari Martin here, Director with the National Alliance for Public Safety GIS Foundation. I've been with NAPSG for almost 8 years now and worked closely with Kevin almost that entire time in one way or another, mostly on this climate and community resilience committee that we started back right before COVID, during COVID, one of those things. And then prior to that, I worked as a GIS specialist in a local capacity. And I'll turn it over to Emma to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. This is Emma Montague. I'm a GIS technician for NAPSG Foundation. I've been there for about 2 years, and so far I've been working with the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and I help with volunteer firefighter recruitment and retention, and I also work with FEMA on supporting the RGO. Before coming to NAPSG Foundation, I worked for the U.S. Forest Service as a wildland firefighter.
Great. So Emma and I are going to tag team some of the InSPIRE stuff along with Kevin, who got to attend for the first time this year. So that was super exciting. Okay, so for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Innovation Summit for Preparedness and Resilience, it's a 2-day annual event. The location moves around the country, so we typically partner with universities, and the attendees are usually a mix of decision makers, like your emergency managers and your planners, first responders from law enforcement, fire and EMS, and search and rescue, and technologists, largely GIS professionals supporting public safety. And we've been working hard to get our counterparts at, Department of Transportation and Health to attend as well. So this year we had over 150 registrants. It was a broad cross-section of public safety and GIS practitioners from across the country. We held 17 sessions, running typically 2 to 3 concurrently, with the exception of the morning keynote and final sessions. And we typically try to have a blend of technical, operator, and decision-making sessions. So for instance, we had a session from North Carolina for planning for special events, and Ohio and FEMA presented on damage assessments. We had a first responder session, which was a hands-on exercise. Chris Rogers from our team facilitated a field data collection activity. So they went around the campus using various mobile apps to walk through some common fire pre-planning tasks. In addition to the ones that we'll highlight today, we can't unfortunately cover them all. I wanted to mention Sanborn presented on successful collaboration between public sector and infrastructure operators. So there really were too many to list in detail, but those materials will be available after in the coming weeks. So regardless of whether you register or not, they are available. Hopefully you'll find some that we talk about interesting and you'll go back and check them out later. But lastly, I wanted to mention that this event is free. We also give out several travel scholarships. So it's free registration, meals, we have the scholarships and socials at the summit, and those are all because we have very generous sponsors. And I would also like to mention that GPN, formerly ERISA, has been a partner for InSPIRE for several years. And this committee has generously shared their travel tips for reducing your carbon footprint with our attendees. So, and then lastly, this summit all occurred while supporting Hurricane Helene, which made it quite interesting. So for those of you who've never been or typically do go and have a severe case of FOMO, I wanted to share a few pictures from this year so you can see what you missed and maybe get a sense of what it might be like in a future summit. So here's a look at a few of the sessions on the top left. We had, that's the IAFC, we had Dewberry, and one of the sessions that we're going to talk about. We had our awards ceremony on the bottom right, where we had rock star Shelby Roberson from Montgomery County, Maryland Police Department, Daniel Stowe from Oregon Office of Emergency Management, and Jeff Doolin from the IAFC. Top right is a panel that we had on day 2. And then at the bottom, we have a social event at the end of the summit in the evening after the second day. And this year was super fun. It was at a place called 16-Bit. It was a bar and arcade. And that is a light bright wall, which was pretty cool. And as I mentioned, part of the desire to do this webinar was This year was different. We had Hurricane Helene hitting just before the summit, and a lot of the people who typically attend InSPIRE weren't able to attend. And also some of the folks that, like us and our colleagues that did attend, were also kind of dealing with the Helene simultaneously and the summit. So we had a mobile EOC going at the hotel, and then at the university, they were amazing. They gave us these pods to work out of, so we were able to, in between sessions, keep things rolling. Our partners at New Light Technology, Dewberry and Esri, among others, were all kind of simultaneously supporting the response and attending the summit. So just kind of superstars all around, working hard. All right, so with that, I wanted to start with the first session that we want to highlight. As I mentioned, we can't possibly cover all of the meetings and presentations, so we're just covering the ones either that we were involved with or that we think would be particular interest to the folks that typically attend our Climate and Community Resilience series. So this first one we called Chad Squared because the presenters were both named Chad, and so why not? So we had Chad Council, who is a technical staff member of the Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief Systems group at MIT Lincoln Lab, and Chad Beam, who's one of the section chiefs over emergency response for South Carolina State Fire. I think he just got a promotion, but Chad was unable to make it. So we had Kevin, who put this together for us today, who's leading this effort from NAPSG, step in for him, because as you can imagine, during Helene, he was quite busy. So for this session, participants in the session discussed operational needs and potential technical solutions, as well as they identified what some of the challenges were to implementing new technology, some of the current capability shortcomings, and the process for accelerating adoption. And they specifically focused on AI, machine learning, remote sensing, and robotics. So there were some key takeaways that they wanted to mention, other than robots can dance pretty cool. For anyone who's kind of interested in this topic, we wanted to make sure you're aware that this effort is kind of ongoing. So the group identified some key challenges that we took away from the session. This was a very interactive session. They had breakouts, they discussed a lot of things. And three things that they mentioned were that cost and effort continues to be a hurdle for public safety agencies. Lack of standards make it challenging to have any kind of confidence when working with vendors. And many of these technologies, while promising, are still relatively new and difficult to explain the kind of benefits that they could bring an organization to get buy-in. So as I mentioned, I wanted to make sure anyone who's interested in this topic knew that this was an ongoing effort. Earlier this year, NAPSG and MIT held an advanced technology and public safety workshop. And it's these types of engagements that ensure that the needs of public safety are aligned with the work being done by researchers and scientists. So please stay tuned as this effort continues wherever your interest lies. There will be more opportunities to contribute as well. I expect to see more outcomes like the adoption of standards for indoor mapping, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. So next, hopefully I'm not talking too fast. Next, I wanted to share something that we've done for the first time at this last InSPIRE, which was hold a panel of women in public safety and GIS. So we were extremely fortunate to have this amazing panel of women in public safety and GIS on the morning of day 2. They were all phenomenal. They represented the public sector, the private sector, law enforcement, and fire, and were really generous with their stories. So I wanted to share some key takeaways from that. The session started off with a number of statistics showing that women are still minimally represented in C-suite positions, public safety, and tech fields. And our panelists shared their experiences and challenges working in male-dominated fields. They also talked about the groups and mentorships that have been part of what has been valuable for them within their organizations. One of our panelists shared a program at Here Technologies that connects female employees with mentors and sponsors. It's called the Women's Initiative Network, or WIN, and they hold women in tech events where they bring in guest speakers that are prominent in the field. They have a number of communication channels for staff to discuss issues that affect women's career development and progress within the industry. And what's interesting is research actually indicates that women in STEM fields who have sponsors tend to soar. 37% are more likely to ask for a raise, and they're 200% more likely to see their ideas implemented due to the increased visibility that a sponsor provides. So, and research shows that company-created and supported sponsorship programs boost the number of women in STEM who are advancing and intend to stay by 72%. And then lastly, we shared the international advocacy group Women in GIS. They are a great network of women and allies working in the geospatial field, who provides community support and professional resources. So I'll add a link for that group in the chat. Certainly hope you'll look into them more, whether you're a woman, an ally. They're a great group that does a lot of really cool things. So with that, I believe I'm going to hand it back over to Kevin, who's going to share more about the session that he facilitated. Yes.
Thanks, Tari. So to give a little bit of background on why this session appeared in the lineup for this conference, there is a work group within the Community Resilience Committee activities in ERISA that for probably about 3+ years, maybe 4 years at this point, has been focused on understanding the concept of social equity as it applies to public safety, emergency management, community resilience, and all things related. If you're interested, by the way, in this topic, please reach out to Tari or I, because we'd love to get you involved. We came to the conclusion that this would be a fantastic opportunity to put together a panel of individuals at the InSPIRE Summit that brought together different perspectives on this issue, this question. And so these panelists are represented by the individuals that you see here. Benjamin Rance is a longtime supporter and past presenter actually in this webinar series. So if you're interested in Benjamin's work, go check out ERISA's YouTube page. It's there. Benjamin is the Community Resilience Program Manager under the Analysis and Capacity Division in FEMA. And among other things, oversees FEMA's RAPS program, which includes within it one of what we're going to call a social index, and I'll talk more about that here in a few minutes. Does a lot of fantastic work and is really passionate about this subject. We also brought a local perspective in. I was very pleased that we had two experts from our local Indianapolis community. One, Mr. Ben Tapper. If you've ever had the opportunity to meet Ben, you would find it memorable. He's passionate, extremely interesting, very bright, just a fantastic person. We're lucky to have him in Indianapolis as our Chief Diversity and Equity Officer. And then Mr. Jacob Spence is our Emergency Management Director in the city of Indianapolis with our Metropolitan Emergency Management Agency. And then I had the opportunity to serve both as a facilitator, which with this group was an honor and not at all a challenge because they have much to share and much to say, and as a presenter. And so I'll tell you a little bit about what we heard that I hope you will find interesting. And I don't want to forget to do this. This topic of social equity and emergency management is going to be a whole separate webinar on behalf of this committee coming up probably in the range of about early to mid-February. So check the website frequently because that is definitely coming up on the radar. So next slide, please, Tari. So Benjamin started out conversation by sharing what I suspect many of you are aware of, which is Executive Order 14008. This is the rule that essentially requires that 40%, many refer to this as Justice 40, requires 40% of the overall burdens of selected, but many federal programs involving climate, clean energy, sustainable housing, etc., flow to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized by things like underinvestment or being overburdened by pollution. It's a very important thing that occurred that really has driven this conversation about what is social equity? What is social risk? Where does it occur? How do you explain it? How do you quantify it? How do you address it? And so the goal is, as the slide suggests, to advance the concepts of environmental justice to these disadvantaged communities. There's many, many different investment categories. I've had the opportunity to present multiple times in various venues to transportation organizations and metropolitan planning organizations, and certainly emergency management and many others. I've built this concept, this discussion into the social science class that I teach, a social science data course that I teach for my university. This is everywhere. And the reason it's everywhere is because it touches almost, to some degree, many different aspects of the communities, which means a very large segment of ERISA's membership and the broader geospatial community, the GPN membership, really needs to pay attention to this. Next slide, please. So we talked about the combination of things. We looked at what's available to address this question of social equity, not only on a national basis, but we talked about the local presence as well. Now, I know many of you likely represent communities that have developed systems that could be in the form of a dashboard or databases or various other types of presentation media and data access formats. There's a lot of information out there. Since we were in central Indiana, we talked about what is available, which is a system called Savvy. If you're interested, feel free to explore it. It is totally free. It's open out there. Savvy is the product of going all the way back now, 35 years to 1994, a tremendous amount of engagement across lots of different organizations. And in full disclosure, my center actually manages the technology for this. 13,000 plus indicators covering all sorts of different things, health and education and public safety and things that you see listed here. That's just in the central Indiana area. In southwest Indiana, there's now roughly 1,000 different indicators, and there's data in some level available statewide. This information, and the important part is that this information is being leveraged by social service organizations, by public safety agencies, by economic development organizations, transportation planners, all sorts of different entities, to understand the characteristics of the communities that they serve. And one of the really important things that I think I really stress is that the information is it's not a single point in time. It's not just come visit the site and see what the 2020 census data shows you. It provides access to information over time. It allows you to bring the temporal component into understanding how communities change. And it also integrates qualitative information about the culture and the history of the community. This is certainly what could be construed as a high-end, very, very detailed, massive amount of information that's not universally available. And for that reason, what we also talked about in this panel discussion was what is available globally. So Tari, next slide, we'll talk a little bit about that. Before I get to that, I should mention that data is great. I think there's no one on this call attending or presenting that's going to disagree with what I'm about to say. Data is great, but it's only great if it's used efficiently and effectively, right? So one of the things that has been done, one of many, is a hub has been created, and researchers have taken the information, developed reports and guidance and best practices on how to practice equitable activities and how to understand where equitable needs exist or equity needs, related needs exist. So next slide. So as I said, we also talked extensively, and I should say this is at a period of about, I think, 90 minutes or so, about 50 minutes I think we had for this one. We talked at length about resources that are available on a broader national scale. One of these resources, which I suspect many of you are familiar with, is the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. This is something developed by Council on Environmental Quality. It identifies areas as areas of concern or not. And the quantification of those are based on the 8 categories that you see identified here. Now, we're not going to talk at length about these tools today, but that webinar I mentioned earlier, coming up early next year, that's where we will get into the details. What I do want to introduce you to, though, which we'll dive into much more in the upcoming webinar, is what comes up on the next slide. Tari, please. And that is a product that the combination of NAPSG and ERISA's Community Resilience Work Group have been working on for a number of years. Now, if you've seen this before and you have not looked at this within the last 6 weeks, you're out of date. There's a lot of recent improvements, and I shouldn't say improvements, I should say enhancements that have been done to this product. So let me explain what this is and why it matters. One of the things that we came to realize when this group of individuals got together in ERISA and said, you know, what do we need to think about with the concept of social risk and social equity, is that a lot of people were creating tools and products designed to answer that question. So you have things like SOVI, which people have heard of, University of South Carolina. It's a great product, you know, good thing. It's been used for a long time. You have SVI, something that the Census Bureau has created. You have CRCI, a FEMA product. You have the National Resilience Index, another FEMA product, and there's more and more and more. The thing that these tend to share in common is that in many instances, they produce a number, an index, somewhere typically between 0 and 1. And depending on what you look at, it doesn't come up with exactly the same number. The reason it's not that difficult to understand is because they're looking at different information. They are based on different models. Now, that's okay for those of us that like to dig into models and love data and manipulating that and all that stuff, but it's kind of painful when you're the person that is charged with living and working in and for a community, trying to do the mitigation planning or trying to understand how it impacts some aspect of resilience or potentially even disaster operations or any number of other things. And so what we've done is we've created this resource which identifies what is built into these different public domain, national-based tools and how they're intended to be used. So on the right, you see just a quick summary, an overview guidance comparison chart. You know, it's kind of what this is about. By the way, you might notice a QR tag on there. You can click on that anytime you want. If you've not already done so, it'll give you access to that guidance. Tari, next slide, please. This is just a couple of screenshots for the other things that are included in this product. And again, come to the next webinar and we'll talk to you a lot more about it. But this is a shot of the overview. You know, just look at these two different maps and this kind of gets the point across a little bit, I think. One thing to consider is, are we looking at vulnerability or are we looking at resilience? Those are not the same thing, right? You know, one is are you at risk of something? And the other question is, are you prepared to be resilient to that risk? It's not the same questions at all, but oftentimes they're interchangeably used. And then we've also got a lot of other information. Tari, please present the next slide. Thank you. Each one of the indices, and this is one I chose because it happens to be the one that Benjamin talked about at length during the InSPIRE Summit panel discussion. This is an example of what is available for each of the indices that we have addressed on this website, talking about what they include, a description, how the data was actually put together. And I should say each of these is credible. I don't want to imply otherwise. They're based on, in many cases, peer-reviewed research, and they're well thought out, but they answer the question in different ways. And that's okay, because in science, that is how things are often done. This tool, this product is designed to be the interface between the scientific community, if you would, and those that need to and can benefit from the work that they do. Next slide, please. This is another example of things that you'd find on this resource. This is a breakdown of all the different kinds of variables data that are used. And, you know, I don't want to get into too much detail here, but what we cover here is an example of who builds it, who owns it, How detailed it is, some of these examples are built based on county level reports. Some are census tract, for example. How large of an area do they cover? What are they? Obviously, what kind of outputs do you get? In some cases, you can download the raw data, which is almost all administrative data, incidentally. Sometimes you can't, right? You can only see the final index value, so it varies by resource. Next slide, please. We're going to talk a lot more about that resource again in that webinar coming up. But for this webinar, what I want to do is just spend a couple of minutes talking about the key takeaways that occurred during this panel discussion. So what we did is we had the first part of the panel be a presentation by the panelists themselves, answering questions such as, from the federal perspective, what does the concept of social equity mean? What kind of tools and resources do you have? What do you use? What do you provide as resources to the community? Case in point, and the RAP tool, the CRCI that we just talked about briefly. We had the same kind of conversation with representatives locally. So for Indianapolis and other local communities that you're familiar with, how do they approach the concept of social equity? What data do you use? What data do you need? In other words, what's missing? Because inevitably, we don't have all the answers, right? This is an area that is new to many people, and not everything exists that we may potentially want. So what do you do in place of it? And then the other question, of course, is, well, what if you had the best possible outcome, what is it that you'd like to see occur? So I want to share 3 or 4 things, observations that came from that conversation. Tari, next. So one of the things that multiple people in the audience expressed was a need for guidance on how to assess social risk. So in other words, it's not just enough to have these terrific tools with really user-friendly interfaces and ability to download the data, et cetera, out there. It's important to provide guidance, well-structured guidance with use cases that explain how to leverage those tools and the associated data to apply it locally. In many instances, this is my opinion, but it's a strongly held one. I know that's shared by many. The answer is not one size fits all. Communities are unique and they need to be addressed accordingly. So how do you take information provided at a national scale and apply it locally? How do you identify gaps in what you need? Those are the types of things that these representatives in the audience, that the members of the audience, I should say, were expressing. Next, please, next bullet. We also had, this was, I thought, very interesting. A lot of times we when we have a conversation about social risk, it's something that you typically have the opportunity to sit back in a chair, sit around a table, and have a long, meaningful discussion about. And many times you have many discussions about it with different stakeholders. But a lot of the people in this audience were first responders. Their focus was disaster operations, right? Disaster recovery. And so the perspective that they brought was one in which understanding the social landscape was no less important than it was to the planners in the audience, which were certainly there as well, but it was more urgent. And so what they needed to know, as they expressed it, was they needed to know how the social landscape was changing, ideally in real time. That's not necessarily a simple thing, but it does open up some interesting questions, some of which we discussed in that forum, which were, could we leverage, for example, artificial intelligence to gather information about the changing social landscape as it's occurring, right? Understanding it's not perfect, but could it be sufficiently credible and trustworthy that we could act upon that knowledge? It's a very interesting conversation. Tari, next bullet. We certainly had some really important conversations, I thought, about the need to integrate the combination of quantitative and qualitative information. This is one of the things that I really personally stress when I'm working with communities and in my own work. It can't just be about numbers, right? It can't just be We're going to look at the data in the census. We're going to look at the data in, all the numbers. Those are important. That quantitative information is critical. But the qualitative information, the lived experiences of the people in the community, their history, their culture, their perspectives, their impressions, these are not unimportant things. And to understand social risk, you have to combine social science it looks at the combination of quantitative and qualitative information. So there was a need expressed, and I was really happy to hear this, that there needs to be more understanding of how to collect and process that information, how to develop partnerships, potentially with organizations in the community that have been thinking about this, that can work in tandem with people in public safety to bring their combined expertise to address those needs and opportunities. Tari? And then lastly, this idea, which I thought was really good, of finding ways to make sure that we're capturing the perspectives of the disadvantaged populations in some instances that do not respond to traditional ways of reaching out. So, you put out a survey on a cell phone, that's great if you have one, right? You put out a survey, you open a public meeting to the community, that's great if they come, but what if those individuals maybe have a sense of distrust in government? What if those individuals don't think their opinion matters? What if? So the question is, could we come up with solutions? Remember, this is a public safety GIS conference, GIS technology. Could we find a way to leverage technology to gather knowledge using passive or active methods, likely a combination, to fill in those perceived gaps so that we can really understand, especially since we're trying to focus on that population, that we're fully capturing what it is that we need to know. Tari, that might be my last bullet. Next, please. It is indeed. I'm going to turn this back over to Emma now. All yours.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. All right, so another session that occurred at InSPIRE this year was on mapping to safeguard our nation's cultural assets. So we had Kara Griffin from FEMA and Salim Geddes and Tara Wilbur from Delaware Emergency Management Agency, or DEMA. And next slide, thank you. They are part of the Heritage Emergency National Task Force. So that's a collaboration between FEMA and the Smithsonian institution. And this task force, they strive to protect cultural and historic resources in our nation's states, tribes, territories, and local communities from the damaging effects of disasters. And next slide, please. So they work both in gray skies and blue skies. For soon after a disaster, they can provide technical assistance to nonprofit cultural institutions and art organizations. And they also work with the general public. So in the aftermath of a disaster, they will deploy preservation experts and salvage or try to protect family heirlooms like photographs, videos, and antiques. And next slide. And their work during blue skies is they are trying to compile an updated database of all of the nation's cultural resources. So they identify and make contact with these cultural heritage and art institutions, meet with them and record the contact information to continue this relationship. So that's one thing. They're working on the data, and then they're also performing annual trainings for teaching preservation and salvaging methods. And next slide. So here are some resources for more information or to get in contact with them. my takeaway from this session was that, you know, when cultural heritage is destroyed or damaged, communities lose resources for like economic development and tourism and commerce, as well as more of a shared identity. And obviously saving lives is the first priority for emergency responders during a disaster, but this session expanded on the importance of preserving cultural assets during disasters after life and other resources have been prioritized. Also, so two of the speakers were from Delaware Emergency Management Agency, and they have a special or significant use case with Delaware for the Heritage Emergency National Task Force. They performed a mapping project which produced a statewide data set of 120 assets from like monuments to archives. And then so I believe they've had 2 disasters declared in Delaware since then. And this data set was used in like mitigation and planning decisions. So we'll drop those links in the chat as well. And then next slide, Tari. Oh, that's not a link. All right, so another session was the GIS Solutions Pageant. So we capped off InSPIRE with the second annual pageant. And this is a fun and exciting event where anyone who signs up can show off their GIS application or product they've made. There are judges and there are prizes. It's a whole fun event, and participants are encouraged to do a live demo, and they earn points for clearly stating their like problem that they have and how their GIS product that they created solved or at least helped or alleviated the problem. And it's also an opportunity for people's creativity to really shine. People can dress up in costume, they can demonstrate with an interpretive dance or a rap. However, each person has strictly 5 minutes. Tari, I just realized you could keep going forward in the slides. Thank you. So a strict 5-minute mark for presenting each demonstration. And as soon as 5 minutes have elapsed, the presentation is just completely over. So think about what you're working on right now, some projects or just something you're doing for fun in the background of work, and you can sign up and participate in the 3rd GIS Solutions Pageant next year at the 2025 InSPIRE. All right, Tari, do you want to go ahead? And then next slide. All right, Tari, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Emma. Before I talk about this, I want to mention that the task force session was one of the there's always every year there's these cool sessions about some sort of initiative or something that's going on, either as you said, or blue skies or gray skies that a lot of us don't even know that's happening, and they're doing cool work. So I was really excited that you brought that to the summit this year. And speaking of next year, so in next year it's going to be a little bit different. So if you've attended InSPIRE in the past, this one will have a little bit of a different look and feel. We were asked to do this in Louisiana as a commemoration of the 20th anniversary of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. So we are partnering with locals in Louisiana to pull this together. We will have the final dates coming very soon. As Emma mentioned, I'm expecting another GIS Solutions pageant there. We're going to try to do one every year. As she said, it's fun. It's a great way to end the summit. People get prizes. You guys are so creative. It's a really good time. So because this 2025 is kind of also a big date for us, we will have had 20 years of summits, not all called InSPIRE. And so we would love to pull together a montage video, which we've done something similar in the past, of the great work that you all do. And it can be something that was either influenced by NAPSG or NAPSG event, or another, public safety event that you attended, or someone else in the community. We would love to get your submissions, whether it's like images of some of your products that you've created over the last 20 years, if you're old enough to have been creating stuff for that long. And then also looking for photos. If you have anything from, in particular, Katrina and Rita, that would be great. So we'd love to be able to feature all your great work in our video. So please take this QR code. We'll also send this out in an upcoming newsletter as well. So if you don't think of something today, we'll be socializing that over the next few months. So we certainly hope that you will contribute, and hopefully the stars will align and the disasters will be calm and everyone will be able to attend next year. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kevin to talk about some upcoming events.
So if you're new to the educational opportunities provided by the GPN, I encourage you to alleviate yourself of that gap because there's so much that is available. The GIS Leadership Academy is a program that we're extremely proud of, having offered it many times over the years. Those of us who've been in the industry for decades, like myself and others, we can always learn something new. Whether you're early in your career or whether you're further along, you can always learn about how to be a more effective leader. There are two examples of this coming up. One in November of 24 in Fort Worth. Actually, that's a little dated, isn't it? That's not coming up anymore. Sorry about that. There's one recent one. Well, actually, that is true. I'm sorry. My brain is in December. I just decorated my office for the holidays, by the way. So my brain is definitely in December. That one is still coming up, November 18 to 22 in Fort Worth, Texas. So you still have time to sign up. And then in early December, there will be a virtual offering of the Leadership Academy as well. Our LEAP conference, which addresses location enterprise addressing and public safety, is another virtual conference occurring in late January of next year. And then in March, we have another conference. We love conferences. It's all about getting together with our colleagues and sharing. Coming up in March in Columbus, Ohio. Next slide, please. And we have many, many, many new webinars coming up. The Vanguard Cabinet, which is a part of the organization I'm exceptionally proud of. This promotes the activities and work of our young professional community, is always doing something interesting. One of the things coming up is what they're calling a MAPI Q&A. Just the title itself should make you happy and want to get involved. Passing the torch with outgoing Vanguard leaders. These are just absolutely exceptional people. I've had the honor to get to know over the years, and again, we can all learn from them. Working together in an organization like this is not about the senior folks telling the junior folks what to do. It's about us learning from each other because we can always grow together. So this is a great opportunity to hear from those individuals and share some things yourself potentially. And then in December, the Community Resilience Group is doing yet another of its ongoing series of webinars. This one will be on the high-resolution coastal land cover data set for the nation. We have a representative from NOAA coming to speak with us on that. Not yet posted on the slide, but coming up early next year, we're going to have a presentation from someone involved in the United Nations GIS report that was put together fairly recently. We've got the presentation that we're going to be doing on social indices and the work of this committee, and much more on that topic coming up in February. We've got presentations on best practices from different communities coming up, and I assure you there is many, many more interesting topics coming up next year beyond that. Oh, by the way, if there's something you think would be interesting to hear about, please reach out to Tari or I. We'd love to bring speakers in. Feel free to suggest somebody and bring them before you to share their knowledge that helps us all work together to make our communities more resilient. Next slide, please, Tari. And then, of course, I think I just mentioned we do have more leadership academies. right? So we have the GIS Leadership Academy coming up in June of next year, November. We have an Advanced Leadership Academy coming up, and then in December, we got one coming up too. Notice these are all over the country, so there's going to be something close by you. And if you've never had the opportunity to visit some of these cities, I've been very fortunate, traveled a lot, been in all of them. They're all worth visiting. And if you want to understand differences in culture, those are 3 great communities to visit to help really get your arms wrapped around the amazing diversity of this country that makes it so special. So feel free to try to visit all these places and pick one of those opportunities to go to the Leadership Academy while you're at it. Next slide, please. And of course, the best event of the year, yes, I'm biased, I confess, but I'm proud of that bias, is GIS Pro. Next GIS Pro conference is going to be in the Rockies, Denver, Colorado. Great city, coming up first week of October. I hope I see everyone there. It is, I think, one of the best geospatial professional conferences that exist anywhere. You get to hear a lot of interesting things. You get to talk and build your network, grow relationships. You know, it's just such an amazing place to be. There's nothing like it. So if you haven't been to GIS Pro before, mark your calendar for October 6 to 9. This is your opportunity to fill that gap. Next slide. And we're almost there. One of the things that the GBN also does is it provides that ongoing opportunity to stay connected. So take advantage of that. New members receive the rest of this year and all of next year. If you're not already a member of the organization, hop on, become part of it. It's a great family to work with. There's just lots of passionate people with lots of interesting things that they do. And I have never had a week go by that I did not learn something new that's helped me grow professionally and serve the communities that I work with as a result of being part of this. Next slide.
I think that's it.
That's it. All right. So if there are questions, we would be delighted to take them. Feel free to put something in the chat if you like. I think we have a couple of minutes, but I will say we're delighted that you took an hour out of your busy schedules to attend today's webinar. Definitely hope to see you again in the future for any one or hopefully all of our upcoming events. Thank you very much. Tari, anything to add?
No, you did amazing. It's your close out. Thank you, Kevin.
Appreciate you and Emma. It's always great to work with you guys.
No, thanks so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care, all.